How you doing, Scott?
Hey, Stefan, great to meet you, man.
Yeah, you too. I'm going to ask first how you sort of came to be aware of with this particular story and what it was about this tale that made you want to bring it to life on screen.
Well, Guillermo del Toro approached me and he said, Scott, your last three films have been horror films and nobody knows it.
Hmm.
Would you ever consider actually directing a horror film? And I said, yes. I said, some of my earliest film experiences and fondest remembrances were seeing movies that I was too young to see and shouldn't be seeing with my older brother. And I said, I love the genre and its challenges. But Guillermo also knows that I write all of my own films. And there was an existing screenplay, very good one, and a really wonderful short story. But there was a particular story that I wanted to tell about holding up a dark mirror to the fears and anxieties that Americans are experiencing today. And out of that came the film that you've just seen, Antlers.
Until Guillermo had sort of told you that, had you considered your previous films horror movies?
Well, I mean, Christian Bale and I did discuss the horrors that Americans have inflicted upon Native Americans for centuries, and that this was, in a sense, a horror film. And I spoke to the composer Max Richter, who was composing the music for the film. So in a sense, I also knew that Johnny Depp's Whitey Bulger was a horrific character, but not in the sense that they're actual horror films, just that they're dealing with very horrific themes, the social aspects of the movie that I try to weave into my films. But no real monsters in any of those movies, except for maybe Woody Harrelson and Out of the Furnace.
Yeah. I mean, but even though that they can be tied together by the sort of themes they deal with, I find every single one of your films so different from the last. Is there a kind of conscious decision on your part to keep trying your hand at different things, or are you just sort of following the good stories and seeing where it takes you?
No, it's incredibly conscious. I think the great danger is in doing safe work, in making the same film over and over and over, and I have no interest in that. I think I like to be pushed into very uncomfortable places as a film director. I haven't made it easy for myself because the genres in which I've explored, the gangster genre, the Western, horror films, some of the best films ever made reside in those genres. So you'll always be compared to Scorsese or Coppola. You'll be compared to John Ford or Hawks or Leone or Eastwood. Here you'll be compared to Kubrick or Argento or Nicholas Roeg's Don't Look Now or Ridley Scott's Alien or The Exorcist by William Friedkin. So I haven't made it easy for myself, but why make it easy for yourself? As an artist, you should always push yourself. And I try to each time out.
Well, another sort of a filmmaker this could, might be compared to this latest work is Del Toro. I mean, how was it working with him from a collaborative perspective? And also just how essential is having someone like that involved in a project and getting in moving a film along like this?
Well, I wouldn't have made this particular film, if not for Guillermo, because he's the foremost monster and creature creator we have. And the Wendigo's at the center of this. And I knew it was going to be largely practical with only a little bit of CGI elements. He was incredibly generous with his time and his ideas, even as I was writing the screenplay we were designing the Wendigo and ultimately into shooting and post-production, because a producer who's also a director really knows at all times what a writer and director like I am going through. But it's not the first time that I've worked with a producer who's also a director. The great Robert Duvall, who's a wonderful actor and director. Ridley and Tony Scott produced Out of the Furnace, and now Guillermo here. So I think it makes a real difference because they really know at all times what you need and what you're struggling with.
I mean, you mentioned I love the kind of the practical side to the kind of supernatural in this. How involved were you in the kind of design of some of the kind of the creatures, for use of a better term, in this
Well,
movie?
incredibly. I mean, in every regard, from its inception all the way through what it would look like, how it would move, who was animating it, how it would appear on screen, when it would appear on screen, how it would sound, what did it represent metaphorically. For better or for worse, Stefan, every frame of my film is very deliberate, and that includes the Wendigo.
I wanted to speak about the young Jeremy Thomas. It's a fantastic performance from such a young actor. How do you go about directing a child in a film that is dealing with such dark themes, sort of perhaps above his own age range? I mean, how much can you tell him while at the same time drawing out such a good performance?
Well, I handled it very carefully. It was incredibly challenging. I've dealt with child actors in all of my films, from Crazy Heart to, actually not Out of the Furnace, but Crazy Heart, Black Mass, my own daughters in the beginning of Hostiles, and now Jeremy in this film. But in this film, he's dealing with very dark subject matter that even mature veteran actors would have a tough time with processing. He's in very dark spaces, confined spaces. He's dealing with a father who's transforming. He's dealing with a Wendigo. He's dealing with the burden of duty and self-preservation. He's dealing with shouldering far too much responsibility for a 12-year-old. And he's also doing something that incredibly skilled actors do, which is listen. That's the most important thing an actor can do, is listening to other actors and also allowing the camera to really access his inner thoughts, because the camera knows when an actor's lying. And I would say that Jeremy's performance in this film is as good as anything I've seen this year or at any time. It's so truthful and it's so moving, and it exudes a real vulnerability and an empathy.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, you use the word truthful. I mean, I've always found you're such a character-driven director in the sense that some of the performances you get out of your cast, I mean, particularly, I always thought Out of the Furnace, there was a couple of scenes that just blew me away. So the acting was so fantastic. But one thing that your work does deal with is realism, and I guess I would imagine that drawing kind of naturalistic performances out of actors is easier when set in a realistic situation. So because this was obviously set in a kind of more of a supernatural kind of landscape, did you find it harder to get those sort of performances sort of drawn out of the actors in some way?
Yeah, certainly. It's my first immersion into the supernatural. But I want it to be a very grounded experience, that if we removed the Wendigo entirely, you still have a horror film, and you still have a film that deals with really serious issues, the fears and anxieties that Americans are dealing with on a daily basis. And you want to really keep all the actors in the same key, as though you're a musician, as though everyone is in the same film. And that includes the Wendigo. But the work that I most respond to, it could be Mike Lee, it could be Ken Loach, it could be the Dardenne brothers, right? This very naturalistic and powerfully performed films. But you're also injecting the Wendigo, which is part practical and part CG. But if you look at how Friedkin did that in The Exorcist, you say to yourself, well, what's most terrifying about that film as a parent is that it's portrayed so realistically. And even though the effects in the early 1970s were limited, it was still terrifying. So that was kind of the goal for me. But first and foremost, I'm a performance director, and I really care about very truthful emotions. And so often, when people think of great film performances, they think in terms of, and wrongly so, they think in terms of awards. And the great Robert Duvall always said to me, who's one of the finest screen actors we've ever had, he said, in the Academy, the best acting always equals the most acting. And I try to shy away from that. Yeah. And I mean, certainly he does too. But for me, it's really about a very grounded, emotionally moving and truthful performance. And Keri Russell and Jeremy Thomas and Jesse Plemons and Rory Cochrane, Amy Madigan, Graham Greene, they all do that. Scott Hayes, and they're all in the same key. And as long as, Stefan, my films kind of burrow under your skin and stay there for the rest of your life, I've done my work.
Well, this one certainly burrowed its way under my skin. So well done. But thank you so much for your time today, Scott, and best of luck with the release of the movie.
Yeah, great questions. Thank you, man.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Hey You Guys.
Hey You Guys, huh?
Hey You Guys.
Is that from the Goonies?
It is indeed, yeah.
Nice.
Hey